morning and welcome to Marilyn Snider, who is a global educator and a curriculum coordinator, and today is going to be speaking with us about community languages. Hello, Marilyn, and please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work.
I started as a teacher, and then I went on to be part of the Global Education Project, and then I came in touch with Community Languages Victoria. I lead education professional development. That's how I came in touch with what is CLV, Community Language Victoria.
Can we start, please, with what are community languages and why is it important to have them beyond the home learning environment?
They are languages in Australia that have been sought to be taught by the diverse community in Australia. Since 1857, when I think the first language school started in Victoria, that group has grown. It became the Australian Ethnic School, so they're now called Community Language Schools. And each state in Australia has its own auspices under the umbrella of an Australian Language Federation. They're led by the culturally and linguistically diverse community here in Australia. We have a society that embraces their own histories, backgrounds, cultures, and heritages, and a desire to pass it on to their next generation. With even our own background of diversity among Indigenous communities, there's a desire to keep that going in each section of the huge community we are in Australia. We've always been a country of great linguistic and cultural diversity, and more recently, various migration has led to a greater interest of having language and culture being continued. Nowadays, every second Australian has at least one parent who was born overseas. This shows the importance of language and culture education across Australia, especially for families and communities who want to maintain some of their linguistic and cultural heritage.
So why is it important to have formalised education programs outside the home? Why can't these languages be developed within those home environments?
There are a number of reasons, one being that even though schools often deliver what they call a second language, that language delivered in a school might not be the one language that many of the families in the schools want for their child. And that's understandable because schools have many families of varying backgrounds, histories and heritages and cultures. The other one is that it's not often that parents are the best teachers for their own children. It's got to be done in some formalised manner.
You've touched on such an interesting point there around the multiculturalism and diversity of many schools across Australia. We sometimes hear of schools that have 25, or I've heard up to 40 home languages being spoken. So it must be quite difficult to meet the needs of everybody in those very diverse environments.
It is, and it's not until people come up with a way to have a collection of families with students who want to speak Tamil or Korean, and if that's not the language taught in those children's schools, then there'll be a desire to meet collectively somehow else.
And I would guess that part of that purpose too is that we learn languages to communicate, and we communicate across purposes. Our family is one context and there's one purpose there often, but communicating with our peers or with other adults in the community is going to utilize different languages and language skills and vocabulary. Many schools across Australia, in various states, it's different with language mandates, but they have a second language. Some of them have two languages. That's not necessarily those home languages. How do these all sort of fit together? If I'm a young student learning Urdu, my home language, how do I access that?
You might first contact Community Languages Victoria, and they would put you in touch with a community language school that teaches Urdu. Those language schools meet out of school hours, either before school or after school. Some schools deliver language and culture up to 3 times a week. In Victoria, these all run from the head office in Carlton, Community Languages Victoria.
Is there direct contact between your mainstream school and community languages school educators, or are they seen as quite separate?
I think it's fairly separate at the moment. A number of schools hire rooms from a local state school. So you might have a language school in Preston that teaches language XYZ, and they might hire a room after school or before school from the local state school in Preston. It is delivered at schools where a number of the students are from families that want that language taught. The interesting part about languages now is that because languages other than English or home languages are part of the curriculum, Community Languages Australia is now in the process of seeking a representation of their individual education departments to have community languages recognised as a formal part of a child's education. There is an avenue to receive funding from the Education Department for community languages.
What are some of the other challenges that are currently there, and maybe some ways that people are overcoming those challenges or some possible ideas?
Last year, I was working with up to 46 language schools, helping them to continue their accreditation for funding. And part of that was that they had to adhere to the Victorian curriculum. Now, the Victorian curriculum is not an easy thing for teachers to follow. If you had your schooling in another country and all of a sudden you're working with students in a language school and you've got to report to the standards of a curriculum, it's very hard, and schools have needed a lot of support to tick that box in order to maintain accreditation and therefore funding.
If I was an educator wanting to find out more about community languages, or I was a parent, where would I go to? What would those next steps be?
You would source out Community Languages Victoria. You would seek a gentleman by the name of Fahry, Fahry, and you would ask questions there. I also can guide people into that vein if necessary. They're offered all sorts of support, including professional development, in order to help with behavioural problems in class, how to manage lessons, resources, digital skills, that sort of thing. Did you know that over 300 identified languages other than English are spoken in Australia, and over a fifth, or 21%, of people living in Australia speak a language other than English at home? So in Victoria, as of last year, there are, in community language schools, 50 languages being taught in 198 schools in Victoria to over 42,000 students. Let's go to 100,000 nationally. And there are over 2,800 educators delivering those languages.
I can see why community languages is very important. Well, thanks very much for joining us today, Marilyn, and sharing your knowledge and experience in community languages. And we hope to talk to you again soon.
My pleasure, Lottie. All the best.